Thank you, Dr. Purohit, for raising so many of these challenges that face an institution such as yours. And I was very struck by this almost Weberian distinction you made between the kinds of impositions that a bureaucracy can produce. You began with this image of a museum that's divided against itself. And then as you closed, you invoked a kind of enchantment about how, in fact, you're a divided self as a viewer, and you have to bring those two aspects of the museum together, and many other ideas which I hope we'll bring into the conversation soon. Mr. Mukherjee, could I invite you now to speak?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my privilege to be here at the Victoria Memorial Hall. At the outset, let me thank Dr. Jayanta Sengupta, Curator Secretary, Victoria Memorial Hall, for hosting us and hosting the event, and our dear friend Rajesh Purohit for collaboration, participating in the exhibition. And let me tell you, both of you doing very well. Running a cultural institute is not a joke. You really need, you really need courage to run a cultural institute in Indian setup. We all understand the problem. We have so many don'ts than the do's. And in spite of odds, all odds, we are delivering, we are functioning. So that's the beauty of Indian museums and cultural institutes. And I'm very happy today, for the first time in the history, 200 years history of Indian museum movement, the three iconic museums coming together. For the first time, it never happened in past. This is a small event. 3 directors speaking from one platform, addressing different issues. Jayanta gave his interpretation. Rajesh gave his interpretation, and I'm going to give my interpretation. My interpretation is slightly different. It's, act local, think global. I had a long argument with Neil MacGregor when Neil offered his exhibition immediately after the Cyrus cylinder. I want to give you a history of world in 100 objects. I said, thank you so much. I don't need it. I don't want 100 objects. Only 1 or 2 objects will represent India out of your 100. I want to see and understand Indian history, Indian art, Indian culture in the global context. I want India's major role, I want to understand. And that gave birth to the present exhibition, India and the World, a history in 9 stories. Yes, Ranjit, what you said, in the invitation it appeared. The concept of encyclopedic museum is the gift of enlightened movement in Europe, but it also carries the legacy of imperialism and colonial plunder. We should not forget all 3 participating institutes were created by colonial rulers in a particular time and for a particular audience with a particular interest. It carries a meaning from the past, yet its meaning in the present could be similar or dissimilar. Does it encapsulate the same value as it might have done for those associated with it in the past? Whatever may be the reasons for the origin of the concept, but it helped the then European society, including the ruling class people, to understand the world history into historical context. Otherwise, they knew nothing. As a result of this enlightened movement, people of diverse cultures from diverse countries fought for their freedom movement, for their freedom. So in short, culture changes human lives. Let us understand the role of museum as a cultural institute. That's very important for all of us to understand what is the role of a museum in contemporary society. The interpretation of culture differs person to person. What I feel, I'm saying that I feel because this is something, my interpretation. It may be different from others. Museum as cultural institute always does not mean preservation of legacy or preservation of heritage created by man or living traditions, but empowering people and society at large to evolve with the time and helping them to define who they are as a people, their biodiversity, monuments, and associated relics, behavior, and attitude of the world in which they are living, and the way they think and look at, learn, and communicate. Certain elements may not be acceptable. Elements of heritage may not be acceptable in contemporary society, and people have every right to reject and accept. According to Dr. James Kuno, you also quoted Dr. James Kuno, CEO, President, Getty Foundation. I quote, "The Encyclopedic Museum is a truly cosmopolitan institution, promoting tolerance, understanding, and a shared sense of history, values that are essential in our ever more globalized age," unquote. Keeping all these points in mind, we started interpreting the concept of encyclopedic museum from local perspectives. That is, act local, think global. There were two major questions before us. That's the Dr. James Kuno's quote. How a demographic culture maintains its distinct character and initiate an intercultural dialogue with other cultures. How intercultural dialogues evoke a sense of a body of knowledge that has been gathered from interaction with other cultures and provides someone access to information. Please understand the distinction between the concept of melting pot and intercultural dialogue. There was a kind of seminar in Delhi, and I was participating, and somebody was talking about the concept of melting pot. And I said, I'm sorry, I don't want to melt my identity in your pot. I want to retain my identity. And why should I melt? That's typical, American concept, where people with different origins, languages, religions, and social customs merge to form a single unified culture. However, we should not forget that different metals melting in a pot to form a new alloy, even while having characteristic properties of their own, lose their identities as the original metals melt. This is to the concept of diversity. Today, developing and underdeveloped countries and their people with diverse cultures want to become an equal partner in the world narrative. World does not belong to 5 superpowers. World belongs to us. And we have equal right with America, Europe, and other countries. And that is something we need to prove. And what they wish to establish their regional, national, and global identity in the changing narrative of the world. Through India and the World exhibition, what we tried to tell the world, like the antiquities of past with multiple identities, people can also preserve different identities, not assimilating into one single culture. Intercultural dialogue. Intercultural dialogue is ultimately a conversation between cultures, religions, and individuals engaging in a relationship with each other. Its starting point is the present, from which it explores the past and imagines the future, guided by the needs and expectations of its actual and potential visitors, which values as heritage not only objects or collections, but first and foremost, the individuals and the regions they embody, stories, ideas, emotions, values, desires, fears, and hopes. Let's see the presentation. How do you operate? This is just a 30-second film. I will come to that point. India in Conversation with the World is a landmark exhibition showcasing some of the most important objects and works of art from the Indian subcontinent in dialogue with iconic pieces from the British Museum collection. The first exhibition of its kind, it presents pairs or small groups of objects set in conversation with each other. The catalyst for each conversation is a specific moment in history, repositioning the Indian object in the global context and exploring connections between India and the rest of the world. In the beginning, I said Neil was willing to give us a history of the world in 100 objects, and we said we are not happy with the proposal. We want India's bigger role. We want to see Indian history, Indian art and culture. He asked me many questions. That what is that, you want to highlight? What is that your audience wants to know about India? And then I have to find the connection, the context. And these are the questions I raised. How do we showcase our history, art, and culture at the backdrop of comparable happenings in other parts of the world at the same time? Our school students, our school children, college students, they don't get the global context when they read history. When they visit Indian museums, they see only Indian art, Indian culture. They don't get the world context. How do we tell our audience that the story of India is much older than the story of India as a nation? What is the status of the Indus Valley civilization in the history of world civilization? Very few people outside India know about Indus Valley civilization, one of the ancient civilizations. And I asked Neil, how many European universities teach Indus Valley civilization? They teach Roman civilization, Roman culture, Greek art, but not much about Southeast Asia. Similarly, in Indian universities, teach Indian history, not much about global history. How do we tell our people that the art of writing was invented in India about 5,000 years ago, and the first proclamation of human values was declared by an Indian king 2,300 years ago? If Cyrus the Great from Persia claims, the first proclamation of human rights, then the Ashoka the Great has every right to claim first proclamation of human values. And how this proclamation or message from an ancient king later gave shape to India's freedom movement and our constitution. Gandhiji was hugely inspired by Ashoka's Dhamma. And that gave, freedom to India. Is it not important for the world community to know that India was connected with almost half of the world through sea trade, Indian Ocean, from time immemorial? Globalization is not 1990s concept. Globalization, the concept of globalization goes back to Indus Valley time. Indus people traded with Mesopotamia, Egypt. When Egyptians were busy in building pyramids, Harappans, they were creating cities. How many people know about that? That is important for us. And what was happening at the same time in Babylon, in Mesopotamia, in Egypt, the contemporary civilization, we need to know, we need to understand. We need to understand our position. Then he started thinking in a different ways. He was silent for a moment. He said, it's important, but your history is about 2 million years old history. Your building is not enough for the exhibition. Are you mad? You are talking about Indian history. I said, it's impossible to accommodate Indian history in 10,000 or 50,000 square feet space. Why not we select some iconic moments from India's history, from prehistory to the present, at the backdrop of comparable happenings in other parts of the world at the same time? So it started. And then finally, we identified 9 historical moments. What are the 9 historical moments? So this is, the discussion, brainstorming session. It was very, India and the world. People from different countries participated in the discussion, brainstorming, giving shape to the content. The story begins with shared beginning, when there was no concept of political boundary. A similar kind of culture developed in different continents. The hand axe you find in India, it has come from Chennai. Date goes back to 1.7 million. And another hand axe from Africa. And then several other, hand axes from Europe and Africa gives you the similar kind of culture, similar shapes, similar techniques. And as we move towards Neolithic, we see the differences in different cultures. Each conversation takes a theme and explores how diverse cultures have approached the subject in different ways. This may be exploiting and using natural resources, representing the human form, or more in telling creation, myths, and origin stories. The conversations are arranged chronologically, but it is emphasis that the exhibition does not attempt to be a complete narrative history of India. As I said, it's very difficult. nor can it cover every world culture in each spotlight moment. World cultures will have limited representation in terms of numbers of objects, but the focused nature of the show will mean that each object has major impact. First cities, empire, state, and faith, picturing the divine, Indian Ocean trades, court cultures, quest for freedom, time unbound. Shown together for the first time, the objects speak not only to each other, but to the visitor, who is encouraged to become part of the dialogue by exploring similarities and differences inherent in the objects. And each object is so powerful. I'm not stretching it further. I know you have time constraint. And these are some of the comments, remarks from visitors. And there is one particular remark when I was going through the visitors' remarks book. American visitor, she writes, I quote, "The concept was remarkably clear and assessed itself and its importance with immense certainty. Exquisite creation, equally impressive research process. The efforts to share this timely message about not simply understanding the past in order to reconsider our present and future, but acknowledging how chronology, time, and space are wonderfully complicated the move we see and give into our curiosities, what is unknown, what is uncommonable. This is the idea." Eight-year-old girl, after visiting the exhibition, she started posting some images on Instagram. That is what exactly we expected. The impact of the exhibition when you see such posts. Thank you for being with us. Thank you.
Mr. Mukherjee, thank you so much for that account of India and the world and all of the thinking and the